Jessica actually is the lead person on this training, and so everything that works right is to be attributed to Jessica. If there's any glitches, it's my fault. But so Jess is my colleague. So we're both, as we would say, academics. We work at the university, but most of our work is outside the university. We spend a lot of time working with boards, committees, commissions, citizens groups, whatever, to help people work together collaboratively to make important decisions. Those of you who happen to tune in to the NPR station, the local NPR station, our tagline is up there: promoting stakeholder-driven solutions to complex natural resource problems. That's what we do. What we're going to do today, the rest of the afternoon, is really focused around preparing you to start thinking about the hard questions. All right? This isn't going to be an easy task. I mean, the training might be, but what you have in front of you for the next couple of years is not going to be easy. We realize that. So what we're hoping to do is to sort of kickstart that process to get you to be thinking about what it means to really get to a collaborative decision. What does that mean? How do you do it? So our training today is to get that started. You'll notice on your tables you have a packet of information. So looking at that, what you've got is we haven't I'll just take a look. So on the top, you'll have what's called the Negotiator's Dilemma score sheet. I want everybody to have a copy of that in front of them. You've also, I think, got a sheet that's called Sticky Issues, which is some of the things you'll be talking about this afternoon. You've got a sheet that's labeled Group Charter. I think it's got the Ruckelshaus House Institute logo on the top. Another item that you have is an example charter from the Forest Task Force. We'll be talking about charters today. Okay, yeah, an overview of the group charter. And you also should have a copy of the our agenda for today. So let me quickly review that, let you know what we're going to be doing. So we're going to immediately take you out of your comfort zone and get you started on, it's a game. We're going to play a little game here, a game theory game called Negotiator's Dilemma. We're going to use that to introduce some pertinent topics around collaboration. We're going to use that to talk about trust, cooperation in a seemingly competitive atmosphere. We'll talk about decision perspective, etc. Then Jessica is going to talk to you about negotiation or collaboration concepts. What does it mean by collaboration? What does it look like? How do you do it? So basic steps and definitions. Then we'll go into a break, and then the rest of that time is devoted to some small group discussion. We want you to wrestle with some tough issues. Some things that you're going to have to wrestle with when you get started on these processes. So we thought we'd just get that started and get you introduced to things. So we'll do some small group work, and then you'll be, then we'll see kind of where you are on that. We'll have then large group discussion, questions, answers, all that, and that should take the day. Right. Okay, so our objectives for today are, so we want to introduce you to some concepts of collaborative decision making. We're going to demonstrate the role and function of negotiation and collaboration. This idea here is you're going to sit together. The language that you will use is negotiation. So we'll be talking about that. And then we'll investigate some issues, questions that will arise as you begin your so the Ruckelshaus House Institute, very quick infomercial here. What we do is, our tagline, one of our taglines is advancing understanding of, and and resolution of complex environmental management resources. So we produce materials for decision makers around some of these issues. And we also do this thing we call convening collaborative processes. This idea of complexity. So what you'll be doing, what you'll be engaged in, is what we call, a wicked issues. I mean, these are tough things to deal with because of this nature of complexity. Multiple issues, multiple parties. It's just a lot of stuff on the table. Certainly, we'll have conflicting value orientations at the table. We all think differently, value things differently in different ways. You'll be setting policy and precedent. It's important. The stakes are high. You'll be dealing with science, technology, very difficult questions. Oftentimes, we don't have the answer. So you'll have to be dealing with uncertainty and ambiguity as well. And as I said, the stakes are high. So not easy. So what we need to be thinking about is, what kind of process gets you through this? What is it that we need to be able to do to get through these really tough decisions? So this idea that we're going to collaborate, the language of collaboration and this negotiation. What does that really mean? How do we engage in that discussion? How do we enlarge the pie before dividing it? Exactly. I want you to be thinking these three dimensions all the time. And county commissioners, when you're setting this up, keep these three things in mind. Number one is substance. We all know why we're at the table, right? That's pretty simple. The other two things are relationships and process. Process is important. The process is the way that we can make sure that the relationships work. All those three things have to be working simultaneously for our collaborative process to work, for us to make progress, to move from very different value orientations to solutions that work for everybody. All three of these things have to be working simultaneously. Pay attention to all three. The relationship issues will be paramount. We just talked, Joel mentioned it. Some of the best things that we can do is get out on the ground, work together, have a beer together, or wine or whatever. But that lubricant really does start to help you work as a group. So take that time. It's not just all business. We've got to make those relationships work. All right, so I'm going to immediately get you out of the conference zone. I apologize for that. Nothing really. On your table are you'll see some index cards. Here's what I want you to do. Everybody should have 2 index cards. So pass those around. So everyone has 2 index cards. And also in front of you, you should have the negotiators dilemma score sheet. All right, so number 1, make sure you got the materials. And there may be extra copies and tables with sparse numbers. Well, wait, make sure you don't have the equipment. Let me know. Raise your hand if you don't have the score sheet or the cards. All right, that's step number 1. Step number 2 is what I want you to do. This is going to be a little tricky. Jess, we've got in the back. And I've got some extra. There's some extra charts. We passed the cards. Okay. All right, I think we got everything. All right, so here's the next thing that I would like you to do. I want you to divide into groups of 4, if you can. Okay. So this is a game. This is a card game. Yeah. Play among 4 people. Yeah. If you can't get to 4, 3 will work as well. This game is designed for 4. So find the other 3 people that you're going to play this game with. If there's somebody at the end who's extra and somebody needs somebody, how many people need a player? Anybody need a player? So if you guys have a whole bunch of good people, maybe somebody from that table will leave. So, okay, we got Okay, there's a 4. There's a 4. You need one. We need a. Is there a person that wants to shift to this back table?
Yeah.
Okay, we need one more back here. Thank you so much. Okay. So this is a game that I have played, or that I have played myself, actually. I have worked with probably more than 100 times. I teach negotiation at university, so all of my students, the first thing they do is play this game. Most trainings that we do, we start with this game. Well, we love to start with this game in any group that I work with, because there's a lot of really good insights that come out of this. So, basically, this demonstrates choices in group decision. Okay. The object, and this is important, and this is sometimes hard to keep in mind. The object is to maximize your winnings, regardless of how well others do. So that if you're doing well and others are doing poorly, that's fine. If you're doing well and others are doing well, that's fine, as long as you're doing well. Okay. So the idea here is to think about it from a unitary perspective. We're playing 4th-person groups. You're going to have your 2 cards. What I'd like you to put on your cards is, on one card, put an X. An X on one card, and an O on the other card. X and O. All right, so everybody has 2 cards, one X, one O. All right, so the way this works is this game is played, and your score is determined by the cards that the other players play. All right? So, for example, if 4 X's are played, everybody gets a -1. And this table here is also at the top of your score sheet. You'll see that. If we have 3 people put an X down and 1 person puts an O, the 3 people who put an X each gets a +1, and the O gets a -3. 2 X's, 2 O's. Each person that throws an X gets a +2. Each person that throws an O gets a -2. 1 X and 3 O's. Each O gets a -1, and the 1 X gets a +3. And if everybody throws an O, everybody gets 1. Okay, does that make sense? So it depends on the card that you throw and the card that others throw. All right, so I'll demonstrate 3 rounds of how this goes. Everybody's sure about how this works. Now, what we're interested in is the cumulative total that you get. Okay? So let's say on the first round, you throw an X. There's 2 X's and 2 O's. You threw an X. No, you threw an O. So your payoff on that throw is a -2. It's 2 X's, 2 O's. You got the O. It's a -2. So your payoff for that first round is -2. Of course, your cumulative total is a -2. Round 2. Round 2 is you throw an X, everybody else throws an O. Right? So you get, no, actually 4 X's. I'm sorry. I should memorize this. There's 4 X's played. So everybody gets a -1. So you got a -1. So now your total going in is a -3. The next round, you throw an X, everybody else throws an O. You get a +3. So now your grand total, your balance is a 0. All right, does that make sense? Everybody got that? And if there's any confusion, the other 3 people in your group can help. So now there's a couple more rules that I want to explain. We're going to play 10 rounds. All right, 10 rounds. There's no verbal communication unless I instruct you to do so. So I have some power here. And I hold the microphone. So no verbal communication unless instructed to do so. And remember, win as much as you can. Now the cadence, the way I'll do it is 1, 2, 3, go. And on go, you throw a card. Okay? And you count your total, and we'll go on to the next round. We'll go slowly at first, and then we'll pick up the pace. You'll notice on your score sheet that there's some bonus rounds. I'll explain those when we get to them. Okay? All right, everybody ready? So we're going to go ahead and play the game. So everybody know who you're playing with, the group of 4. So first round, ready? 1, 2, 3, go. 5 more. We want you to give it.
You guys.
So, scores are tallied. So we chose. All right, got your score tallied. Okay. I'm looking. Yeah, it's also on the top of your sheet. That the table on the top. Okay, you got it? Okay, we're going to go ahead and do round 2. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Yeah. Okay, we're ready for round 3. Yeah. Yeah, I'll bring it around and make sure. Delayed reaction up here. I'm waiting for them. Okay. Go ahead and tally your scores. You guys got your scores? All right. Let's go ahead and do round 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go.
We're pretty like-minded or something.
Okay, take the hang of it. Got your score, your cumulative score. Okay, let's go ahead and do round 4. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go.
No, you got lost -3. I'll get 1 plus. That's the second scenario. What is it? Plus 1. Maybe he's going to make a special little change in time.
However you want. Okay. Now the next round is. So I'm sorry. I was so engaged in what they're doing. We just finished round 4. Is that correct? So this is round 5. Round 5 is a bonus round. Okay. So the way this works is your score now will be multiplied by 3. So if you get a +3, it'll be a +9. If you get a -1, it'll become a -3. Got that? And also, prior to this round, you can now communicate verbally. You can talk about strategy if you like. You can talk about the weather, whatever it is you want to talk about. You have 1 minute to communicate verbally before the next round. Starting now.
Yeah. Yeah. So, good thing is part of the negotiation. For you guys.
And we're going to resume the game in 10 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, this is the first bonus round, round 5. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. of you might be drilling a pretty deep hole right now.
I got well below.
Okay, so everybody got their total. All right, let's go ahead and do round 6. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, go.
Yes, I get a +3 and you guys all.
Normal round. Round 6 is just a normal round. Just like
Just down it. I'm sorry, you know.
Okay. Round 7. Are you ready? Round 7. 1, 2, 3, go.
Oh, I didn't think you got
All right, you're probably settling into some pattern. Be interested in what that pattern is. Okay, get your score. All right, round 8 is another bonus round. Round 8 will multiply your individual score by 5. Again, you have 1 minute to communicate perfectly.
Whatever that means. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to resume the game in 10 seconds. Okay, round 8, bonus round. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Multiply your individual score by 5 and carry your total. All right, we're getting close. We're winding down. So we got another 2 rounds. Round 9. Round 9 is a regular round, just like the others. Regular round. Round 9. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, go. And you're supposed to do only as well as you not compare yourself. Okay, this is round 10. Round 10. This is the ultimate round. This round, you will multiply your individual score by 10. Okay? And again, you have 1 minute to communicate verbally, starting now. And the game will resume in 10 seconds. Okay. Round 10. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, go. All right, here's what I'd like you to do. to get your total score, each individual's total score. Here's what else I need. I want a group score. So for every group of 4, add your totals up. I want to get that score as well. So spend a little time doing the math.
You guys do each other out. I'm at 1 plus. You're at 9. 10. I think.
Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I have space on this for 10 groups. We have more than 10. So we'll start with volunteer groups first. And I'd like each of you is yell out your individual score, and then somebody yell out your group score. Okay? So who's ready? Anybody ready? We'll start this table here. Individual scores.
10.
Oops. Well, I think I can get this from that. Okay, 10. Others? Quick.
9.
9.
Oh, each player.
Yeah, each player. Do we need to start over?
9.
9.
26.
26.
Negative 26.
Minus 26.
1.
And 1 gives us a total of 10. We'll go back there. Minus 30. Minus 40. Wow. And what? Plus 32? 39 gives us a total of 2. 3. Shiva. 21, 21. Oops. I can write 21. 21, 21. 21. 21. 84. I know what happened there. You guys. Minus 4. 12. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time hearing. So minus 4. Minus 12. I'm going deaf. Next. 40. Minus 28. Minus 14. Minus, oh, is a total of? Okay, thank you. Yes, far back, far table, yell them out. 44. I'm really curious as what happened. Yes.
Minus 12. Minus 12. Plus 32. Plus 24. 32.
Okay. Or did you guys? And what was the last one? 21 gives us a total of how much? 68. Thank you. We'll go on the far table there.
6. 24. 13.
49. Okay, we'll go ahead. All right, and I got a hand back there. Got it. Plus 7. Okay, that's all I have room for. Now, what do you notice about the scores? They're kind of all over the place. Actually, how many of you that weren't counted had a negative? Anybody else in the room? Okay. So how do we compare these scores? If you were somehow convincing enough to get your fellow players to always play an O and you always played an X, you could get a plus 75 individuals. And vice versa. If you just always threw an O and everybody always threw an X, you would get a minus 75. So that's the range in individual sports. If everybody plays O's on every throw, everybody gets a 25. Now, when everybody gets a 25, and the reason I'm curious about this total score is that what that says is tells me something about cooperation. And I can tell with this table, somebody threw an X at one point, but then every other time, everybody threw O's. All right, so there's this idea here that, and I didn't tell you to do group totals because if I'd have told you that, you'd all know, right? Now, what was the objective of this game? Anybody remember? Yeah, maximize your own score. Yeah, that was hard to do. There are a few people that maximize their own score. And if you do it that way, now you could do it. So, I mean, if we look at this, these folks, yeah, I mean, maximize their own scores. We got a maximum score here. This one, really a maximum score. There's probably some really good convincing on that. I don't know who it was. All right, now there's a way to play this game where you don't have to, right? How do you get around lying in this game? What do you do? If you want to throw an X and convince everybody else to throw an O, you can say, if we all throw O's, we all get a point, right? You're not lying, right? But you're not. So, all right, so here's what I want to talk about. All right, so there's a couple things going on here. So we're going to talk about trust, cooperation, short-term versus long-term gains, and then this more complex idea of different perspectives in negotiation. So let's start with this idea of trust. Is trust an important element in this game? Absolutely, right? So there are two sides to the coin on trust, right? One is being trusting. Is it to your advantage to be trusting? No, it's not. It's just basically not to your advantage, right? We'll talk about why that is. You know why. We'll get to maybe a metaphor that we can use in negotiation. What's the flip side of, a positive flip side of trusting? So if trusting is I'm relying on you, but when people are relying on you, what does that mean? What is the word? Do you know? Trustworthy. Being trustworthy. So being trustworthy, it says, I'm going to say what I mean, I'm going to do what I say, right? So is it good to be trustworthy in this game? Is it beneficial? Let's ask the table with most of the O's. Was it beneficial to be trustworthy? Is that the way that you managed to make this thing work? So we can think about in negotiation, this idea of being trusting or trustworthy. Being trustworthy means basically everything in negotiation. Without trust, and I know, and Joel mentioned this, if you can't trust people at the table, you're not going to reveal information. We'll get to that in a minute. But without trust, you're not going to get very far. Okay? So how do you display trust? Being trustworthy. Right? So the idea here is, I'm going to model trustful behavior. I'm going to say what I mean and do what I say, so that people can start to trust me, and then we can start to build trust around the table. It's critical. Jess and I mediate a lot of negotiations. What we attempt to do in that time period is really establish a basis of trust. That means that you can't get to the hard stuff until you've done the work, the relationship work. Okay? Don't try to speed things up if the group isn't working together yet. Trust is critical. Okay? Lesson number one. This other one is a bit more difficult to conceive of in this case. So the objective was do as well as you can without regard to others. Now when you think about this process that you're going to engage in, you have to do well, right? You're an advocate for whatever it is that you're advocating. You come to the table to do well. That doesn't mean others have to do poorly while you do well. If others do well while you do well, that's fine. Okay? So this idea of cooperation in a seemingly competitive atmosphere can work to your advantage. It can work to others' advantage as well. So just because you're thinking you're coming to the table with this idea that the only way that I can win is if everybody else loses, really misses the point. And this idea that we can cooperate and make this work, even though my objective is to do as well as I can. So that should stay with you as well. This other idea of cooperation, how many, I'm going to go back to the minus and the negative score. Who had the minus 14? I want to kind of hear what happened. Yeah, what was going on at your table? You know, was there an attempt to play O's and did that fall apart? What happened?
Very little communication.
Very little communication. Did you start to throw an X and then as somebody threw an X, things kind of fell apart? I mean, that's often a result of this game is I'm going to try to throw an O, who's an O? And somebody throws an X. All right, second round. Okay, I'm not communicating verbally. I'm going to throw an O again. I'm going to be trustworthy. I'm going to throw an O again. X. Is it to your advantage to throw an O again? Probably not, right? That's not rational behavior. So there's a term called the social trap. Okay? And that is by acting rationally, we can all go down. All right? You know, there's no reason to throw an O. We're going to just throw an X, and we're all going to get a minus. Okay? That's rational behavior. It's like you're on the interstate. Those of you who travel Interstate 25, I'm over on that side of the state. It gets locked up on Saturday mornings for whatever reason, I don't know. But I've been in cases where you're just sitting in traffic on the interstate. Finally, you get up to a point. Somebody had dropped a 2x4 on the road, right? And it just basically locked everything out. You get to that 2x4, boom, you're off, right? Is it rational for you to pull over and pick that 2x4 off the road? Let's say you're late for an appointment, or you could get hit by a car, right? It's probably not rational for you to do that. But if you did, it would help, tens of thousands of people behind you. It's not rational. It's what we call social. We fall into those in many cases, and we should be aware of those. So that idea that we need to dig ourselves out of the hole. This other idea that I want to get across is these different perspectives. And I have a couple of book titles that you might want to investigate. So in negotiation, we need to be thinking that we have three different perspectives that we have to do well on. The first perspective is the individual perspective. And that was the motivation of this game. I said, do as well as you can without regard to others. Okay? The individual perspective means that you know what it is you want, you spend the time focusing on what's important to you, what your interests are, identifying the issues that you feel need to be resolved, thinking about options that will work for you to meet your interests as well as the interests of the other parties. Right? That means being prepared, coming to the negotiation prepared. That's the individual perspective. And there's a good book, it's called Smart Choices. And I use this in my courses, in my negotiation courses. I have my students read this. What this says is, how do I think about the things that I want? And how do I convey those? And how do I know that those are actually the things that I want? That's oftentimes a difficulty for people to really get to. You'd be surprised by the number of negotiations that I've mediated in which people have a vague idea of what they want, but aren't really clear. You can't negotiate well if you don't know what you want. Number one, the individual perspective, really important. At the same time, you need to have a well-honed interactive perspective. And that was really the case in this game. This is what you were doing. You had to think about, I think, that you think that I'm going to throw it up. Okay? That's that interactive perspective. This is a game. And in negotiation, good negotiators have a really well-defined interactive perspective. They're thinking ahead, it's a chess game. And as you negotiate, as you develop skills in negotiation, you really do develop a way of thinking 3-4 steps down the road. How this, so, if I'm going to put this proposal on the table, What will others think? What will that cause others to do? And how will they react? You have to have a well-defined interactive perspective. The third, and this is the one that often gets forgotten, all right? And this is the one that I want you to really understand. And the book that I use is Getting the Edge. Some of you have read this book. I would suggest, county commissioners, this may be the budget thing, maybe we can help you, that before you appoint any group or you get a group together, I am all the book. Okay? This book is probably one of the most distilled approach to what we call neutral gains negotiations. You can read this after. And we'll be talking about some of the principles in this book. But what it says is that we can all play those here, right? There are some joint gains that we can maximize. And we need to be thinking about those joint gains. Right? The idea is do well. And it's fine if others do well. In fact, you might help me on the next thing. Okay? So it's that joint perspective. It enables all negotiators to find their own part. So a clear perspective, a clear joint perspective, and that comes with trust. It comes with time. When you start to work on that, things get easier. Okay? So always think and try to think about those three perspectives and really focus on that joint perspective. So now we're going to get to the dilemma. Why is this called the negotiated communication? This is it. So what we're thinking about in negotiation, and this is really the critical part, is what you're going to do is you're going to create value. What this says is, I could act unitarily and I could get something. But I can't, maybe in this case. I'm interdependent. I have to depend on the parties in the state. So the idea is that I can create value by helping you get what you need, and you can help me get what I need. It's the open. So we do that through open channels of communication, working empathetically with one another, trying to understand what the other parties need, being very clear about what it is that we need, staying off of positions, focusing on interests, and making that work. It's that communication, it's that hard work, and it's honed through developing trust. So we talk about that. We call that full open. So full means I'm going to tell you everything that you need now. Open means you're telling me, and I'm going to be thinking about that and using that and help people with I'm not going to lie to you. So that's how we were able to communicate interests. Now, we might need to be thinking about partial open frequency. Full is a difficult proposition. Why is that? And that is because claiming value is the X card, right? By being full open, and claiming value is we can all throw O's, right? X on the bonus round. X. Okay? I did as well as I could. I got what I needed. However, on the 10th round, did anybody throw an X and everybody else throw an O on the 10th round? Okay, we got one table. Will anybody ever work with you again? And in Wyoming, this is so important, right? When we see each other all the time. You might be able to get away with this in California, New York, or Texas, and Wyoming again. Right? So the X card is the value claiming card. And you can negotiate tough, scrutinize the details, focus on the rewards, push on the pressure points, get it to work the way you want to, regardless of how others do. However, that may burn you in the end. It's up to you to decide how you want to do that. So the negotiator's dilemma is creating value through open channels of communication by being full. Let me tell you what's important to me. Can leave you vulnerable to claiming strategy, right? If there's no trust at the table, things can get kind of so. And the real crime then is that good ideas often remain undisclosed. You don't trust the people around you to talk about and say, well, what if we do this, right? Somebody could go to the reporters. I can't believe what Ken just said in that meeting, right?
So you have to establish trust in order for this to work. So, there's very clear evidence that in negotiations that maximize joint gains, people understand and know what others are thinking. Right? There's clear communication. Otherwise, if there's not clear communication, what you do is you end up with inefficient outcomes, meaning there's value left on the table that you didn't claim. So the idea here is you've got to figure out a way to establish trust that you can engage in full participation. So that's something that is not hard. I mean, it's not easy. Oftentimes, especially when you first get together, you don't know one another. Your instinct is, I'm going to show this person a little bit of power, the power that I have in this game. And I'm going to exert that. I'm going to do whatever I can to show the other people at this table, who you're really negotiating with, right? And that comes out of fear, the idea that, if I don't exhibit or exert some power in the beginning, I'll get taken. That's somewhat natural. So we got to get past those impulses and get to the point where we can actually begin to engage in full exchange. Okay, any questions on that? Questions, comments? Let's see here. And we'll have time for questions. All right, let's move on. Oh, is it?
It seemed like in this beauty example that you actually individually got your best interest in me as well as by cheating.
By convincing others that you could throw in products.
And I'm not sure that actually works very well. I would say.
No, it actually doesn't. And that was this idea that there can be gains made through cooperation. That was really the demonstration. Yeah, if you can convince the other party to go on for those and go next, we'll be astounded that we'll walk away with the things that maybe you need. But how far that goes, and we should think about it and talk to someone. All right, where does it go from there, right? You have to have, there's going to be a delegation. There's going to be other people sort of peering in from outside. Is that really workable? And if not, it's likely to have a team. Okay.
Okay. So, taking all this into collaboration. Some ways to think about collaboration. Doug, you basically did have my presentation for me. Thank you so much. Doug was talking about that decisions are constantly made and will be made that affect our lives. That's exactly right. And that in the collaboration practice is called fundamental paradigms. People want to have a voice in public decisions that affect their lives, but how can that voice be meaningful if the terms, concepts, technical trade-offs are new or distressing to them? So essentially, what collaboration does, as all of you know so well, because you've all done it, is it provides a space and a time for everyone to be able to figure out all the information that everyone needs to be able to know and understand in order to make decisions together. So that there's a lot of learning. Collaboration contains a lot of learning. That's what the communication is about in the negotiators level. So essentially, a collaborative process runs through very close to approximately this process. You start off with the problem, defining and clarifying the problem. What are the problems? What are the issues that we need to discuss? What is the information that we need to go through? Identify your interests. I heard this morning a lot of people talking about what do you want? And they're exactly right. And Steve said that as well. You have to be able to articulate what you want. What is your interest? Because the more you can clarify and articulate what your interests are, the more other people can think, hey, I've got something in common with Leah. Hey, there's something that Doug said that I can latch onto as well. And that's how the claiming of value and the creation of value happens. Generating options. So now we understand what the problems are. We understand what all the interests are around the table. And then we generate options. So what are some ideas for meeting a number, if not all, interests at the table? So that's brainstorming. That's being the really creative part of things. And then evaluate consequences. So you have all these options. If Steve and I were facilitating, we'd take you through all those options, just like we did with, for example, the Forest Task Force. And we said, well, what is option number one? Maybe one or two people say, I like it. Most everyone else says, no, it really doesn't meet my interest. The second option, there are two people who say, I'm not exactly sure about what that means. Everybody else says, that will meet my interest. That's one that's going to have a lot of potential. So you go through all those options. And then there are trade-offs. Are there any trade-offs that need to be made? And I think with this effort, with the Wyoming Public Lands Initiative, it's going to be all about trade-offs. But the wonderful thing is the county commissioners are going to create that space and time for you all to collaboratively go through these processes and explore all of the trade-offs and come out optimizing the value that's on the table for your landscapes and for your communities. And then finally, there's the implementation of agreements. And that's where there's also going to be a lot of work. Just making the agreement is one thing, implementing it is going to be another. So Steve has taken you through the negotiator's dilemma. And even though you're probably not caffeinated enough, I've got a little graph here. But essentially what this is showing is if you did a straight back and forth negotiation. Let's say the buying and the selling of a horse. Let's take my old horse, Blue Boy. And let's do this the Dutch way. Hold on your hand. Okay. So why don't you offer me, slap my hand, you're offering me $200 for Blue Boy. Right? And I'm saying, no, that's not enough. Blue Boy is fantastic, $400. So what do you offer me then? 250. So et cetera, et cetera. In Dutch, we call this handjeklap, clapping hands. So if you did a straight back and forth like that, a nice little handjeklap, a session of handjeklap over Blue Boy, then we would find that one person, the person who's selling Blue Boy, wants to get this much. The person who wants to buy Blue Boy wants to offer that much. And between these two, there's a lot of points where you could reach a negotiation, very straightforward back and forth negotiation. However, if there's more communication, if Ed and I sat down and really talked with each other, so where do you live, how are your kids, we started talking about our lives, we might discover that we not only have both an interest in Blue Boy in common, but we also live close to each other and we could help each other with taking care of kids, something like that. We could create value. And then, that's where collaboration is. And that goes outside of this straightforward, straight back and forth kind of negotiation. We're claiming value. We're going outside. This is the zone of possible agreement. This is the solution frontier. The further out you go, the further you have a chance to create more value than there would otherwise be on the table. Essentially, collaboration is creating value in a way that otherwise would not emerge. And it takes time, as Steve said. But it can happen, and I think this Public Lands Initiative has got a lot of potential for communities and people and places in Wyoming to create a lot of value. So some features of collaboration. It's a negotiation process in which interdependent parties work together to affect the future of an issue of shared interests. And 5 features are critical. Stakeholders are interdependent. You are all interdependent in this. You all need to work with each other. You cannot do it alone. Stakeholders are diverse, with different values, and desire different outcomes. Pete's talked about that really well this morning. Lots of other people did this. Learned by dealing constructively with differences that otherwise would not. That's the creation of the value, as I just said. Joint ownership of decisions is involved. I've done a lot of work collaborating on large landscapes, facilitating collaborative efforts on large landscapes related to forests. And there's several, actually, that wound up being so successful that the environmental organization that originally said not just no, but hell no to the proposition at the beginning, became such a proponent of it that they went with the timber company and the Forest Service to lobby for this agreement in Washington, D.C. And they not only got that, but it generated a lot of money for forest restoration. It was amazing what wound up happening as a result. So joint ownership of decisions is eventually what people can aspire to, and that can generate even more rewards. And collaboration is an emergent property. Just because different stakeholders sit at the table, that doesn't guarantee that collaboration will happen. It's a lot of work. It's an emergent property. And that's all I have. Steve and I wanted to make sure that there was some time for questions. So, any more questions about collaboration? Done.
On your first deal about the negotiation process, you have identified your interests. I would say equally or as soon after as possible, identify the interests of the other people at the table. Because if you do not do that, all you're doing is protecting your turf. You have to understand what other people's values are, what they will like in your mind before you're ever going to succeed. Otherwise, you're just there protecting your interests.
You're exactly right, Doug. You're exactly right. In fact, we have an exercise that we use in our trainings, and I would suggest that something like this might be helpful for work groups that start working together, but it's a negotiation preparation worksheet. You start thinking through exactly things like that. You're exactly right. Any other thoughts? Okay, a lot to think about, and it's after lunch. I think it's time for a break. Let's see how much time should we take. All right, we're on time. We're ahead of time. Okay, until 2:10, please. Let's get together at 2:10.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know. I only know just because. No.
But I like to go back to
That's you know it is.
Oh, yeah. As you make your way back to your tables, you have a number of handouts that I want to discuss. See if you can round these up. So number one is called the group charter. So it's this piece of paper that's got the Ruckus House emblem on the front. If you don't have one, if anybody has any extras, and I'll give you, as soon as I count these down, I'll be able to share them. We've got that. Another one, so the other one is the Governor's Task Force on Forests, group charter. That's an example. We'll work through that, talk to you about that. A third handout, so we got group charter with the Ruckus House emblem on the front, and one called the Governor's Task Force on Forest Group Charter. The third is a piece of paper called Consensus. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then the last one is sticky issues. That's what you guys will be working on in small groups. All right, let's talk about group charter. How many of you have read the guidelines for the WPLI or WLP? Yeah, PLI. Okay, most of you. How many of you, if you had the chance, you'd want to change part of it? Okay, a lot of hands going up. Okay. All right. I don't know if that'll change, but here's the deal. You know, if you're going to get together in a group, remember we talked about substance. You're going to negotiate over land, what that's going to be. Relationships, we're going to be working with people. The third is process. If you're going to be working in a group in which the process isn't going to work for you, is that going to be very satisfying? Probably not, right? I mean, think about this. You know, there are some issues with the guidelines. The guidelines are kind of general, okay? They're giving you some general guidelines, some general guidance. Right, that's a great start because really what it does is it does lay down the basic concepts and principles of collaboration. But in my mind, it just doesn't go far enough. And the reason it doesn't go far enough is because you haven't had your hand in creating guidance that works for you and everybody else at the table. You've got to have that, okay? So when we talk about process, in all the processes that we run out of the Ruckus House Institute, we insist that the group work on a group charter, okay? And in this case, I would suggest that all your charters start with the guidelines, okay? You're going to start with those guidelines. But there are some things that each of you said, yeah, I'd like to change a sentence or two, or maybe wholesale, I don't know. And so what you do in a group is, that's the first thing you negotiate, is how are we going to operate? What are we going to do? How are we going to, you know, so how do we get together? Who sits at the table? Who's going to chair this thing? How is that going to work? How often are we going to meet? How are we going to make decisions? What if somebody who wasn't part of the group says, I need in, knock, knock, knock? How are you going to deal with that? Or you've got somebody who represented wildlife who says, I'm out of here. I'm moving, I got a new job. See ya. How are you going to fill that position? Okay. All of these things you got to have up ahead so that when you hit the rough spots, everybody goes back to the charter and says, see, we agreed on this earlier. This is how we're going to operate. Remember? We had some long drawn out negotiations over this charter. By God, we're going to live by it. Okay. So in these cases, you know, it's up to you. We suggest that you work on a charter. Okay. So basically, this sets the ground rules, how you're going to operate. So if you look at this handout, oh, thank you, Jess. You know, the way we would normally operate if we were facilitating, we would offer you, we would spend some time, I'd be at my computer, and I would work up a draft charter that I think, here's a straw dog, here's some straw man, here's something you can start with. That's usually the easier way You get it, and everybody looks at it and goes, well, I wouldn't do that, I would change this, and that's the kind of discussion that we do. So a charter will have a background. What's going on? Why are you? What's happening? And why are we formed? It may have some definitions so that in case, so that everybody knows exactly. There's going to be a lot of alphabet soup for you guys in dealing with federal lands management. So you probably need to define that early on so everybody's aware of what's in this charter. Critical component is purpose and scope. What are you actually attempting to do? Scope really defines where are we going to do this. So is it a particular WSA? Is it a group of WSAs? Is it landscape around a WSA? Do some discussion, all right? And oftentimes you may say, well, we're still not there yet. Let's put that aside because maybe part of our negotiation is to negotiate the scope of this. So some cases, I work on a lot of these, the charter gets revisited as you start to begin to understand how others want to go about it. You don't want to get hung up and negotiations dissolve over the charter. You don't get any farther than that, right? So don't let this be something that is going to defeat you, because it's a difficult thing to put together in the beginning. It takes a lot of conversation. You have to know what are the product, what's this group going to provide, right? What are those recommendations going to look like? Everybody has to be very aware of what you're trying to put together. Then who's the table? Stakeholder groups and participants. This is where you define, here are the interests at the table. We've got wildlife represented. We have motorized recreation represented. We have non-motorized recreation. We have whatever. Okay? We had that discussion this morning. It's you very clearly identify and agree upon who needs to be at the table. And this is where you're going to engage in a conversation around this. Again, as I said when I introduced the panel, who sits at the table really sets up both the integrity of the process as well as the legitimacy of the process. And so it's critical you look at that and work through those issues together. This thing called constituent representation. This is something that Jessica and I kind of insist go in here. And it's a reminder to everybody at the table that you're sitting at the table. This is what we call, in the parlance of collaborative problem solving, we call it a bounded group, meaning there are going to be 15 people sitting at the table representing thousands of others. Okay, so we need to know how are you going to represent those people behind you. What does that look like? What are your obligations in that? So it's very clear that everybody at the table realizes and understands that, yeah, you're going to go back to your constituents. We're going to meet on Tuesday, and the following month, when you come back on that Tuesday, we want to know what your folks said, right? And we'll have that conversation. So being very clear about that representation is really important. Then a charter, we can get to some specifics about conduct, attendance, preparation for meetings, and informing constituents, again, getting back to that. So it basically says, we will do these things. Okay? And it can be a laundry list. It depends on what you feel needs to be in there. But it's a reminder, again, of your obligations. Okay? And you're accountable. I mean, if you're sitting at the table, you are accountable. So it's in writing here. These are things that you should be doing. I have seen a good example of a situation in which a group was made moving pretty rapidly, and this was on an aquifer issue in another state. Turns out that one individual at the table was not informing her constituents. It was just things were happening pretty rapidly, she just couldn't get to them. And so we were moving forward under some assumptions that everybody was behind this, and everybody's constituents were behind this. Got to a final agreement, and her group at the end said, absolutely no way. Okay? And this was hard fought. We spent a lot of time with it. Right? So these are things that you really need to have in writing and check in. Right? How are we doing? maybe something you might want to be doing at the beginning of each meeting is, have you checked in with your constituents? What's the news? Okay, where are we standing? All right, use that as an invitation. Decision process. Okay, now this is really where this can get tricky. So how are you going to make decisions? Is it going to be majority vote? Is it going to be by consensus? Oh, consensus, oh my God. Can we really do that? Let me put something in perspective for you. If we have majority vote at 51-49 vote, then there's a lot of strategic behavior, right? I mean, it is in your best interests to act strategically to make sure that you get that 51. Okay? That's all you have to do is to get to the 51. And also, what matters is how you pick the people at the table. So if the decision mechanism is majority vote, then the number of people who sit in the seats really matters. All right, and that gets strategized. Okay, and the fight begins before you've even sat at the table. All right. Consensus, which is sometimes difficult, sort of reduces that need to strategize in terms of how many of each of the head counting at the very beginning. Because nothing moves forward, we'll talk about what that looks like. Nothing moves forward without thorough consideration and conversation. Okay. So I want you to turn to another sheet, the one that's called consensus. And I'm going to guide you through some things to think about in this. Now, these are some recommendations from a lot of work that we've done over the years, and what's worked for us as facilitators and mediators in multi-party processes. So, there are multiple meanings of consensus. There's majority vote. There's supermajority, unanimity, and this other thing called conditional unanimity. And that's the term that we like to use. Basically, it works when it works. So let's talk about that. So the advantages of consensus I've already talked about. One is it reduces a lot of strategic behavior. Secondly, it forces the conversation. Okay, it's not simply I don't like it, I'm going to vote against it. It's I don't like it because, and I have to talk about that, right? And then people can say, well, what if we do this? Would you like it then? Okay, that's one of the values of consensus. It forces that conversation. Principles basically are that you're going to participate fully and freely, that you have a common base of information. So basically, what we're attempting to do through a consensus process is to get to a playing field that's fairly level. Okay, we all have access to the information. We all have an opportunity to participate. We won't get shut out by a vote. That we have to develop this and maintain this atmosphere of trust in order for this thing to work. Disagreements are respected, but the work to do that, the work is, can we find a way to satisfy those interests so that we move from disagreement to agreement? And so that we understand why that is. Sometimes you can't, all right? Sometimes you just can't. It's fine. And in fact, I'll tell you this. All groups that I've worked with, and this is over the period of 25 years, dozens, I've never reached a case, I've never had a case where everybody agrees on everything. It just does not happen. We have never had complete consensus. It's just impossible. We just can't do it. And that's fine, because we can move without that. So what is a decision rule that can help us do that? And that is what you see on page 2, levels of consensus. All right. Now, it's also called gradients of agreement. So if you think about an agreement that is something like on a range, in this case, we have a range of 1 to 8. I prefer 1 to 5, and because we can do this with hands. Basically, it says on every option or every proposal that comes out, there's going to be a range of how people like it. Some will love it. Some will say, well, it's okay. I
think we can do better. Some will say I can barely live with it, but I'm not going to fight it. Others will say I can't stand it. And if this goes forward, I'm going to drop out of this group. I'm going to do whatever I can to fight this. Okay? It ain't happening, not by any means. Okay? And I've seen that. So this idea, but then there's this one. I'm just using the 5 scale here. But there's a pressure release. Okay? And that's a 4. Okay? So 1 is I love it. A 2 is, it's okay. I can work with it. That's all right. 3 is, you know, I'm really lukewarm on it. Sorry. And a 5 is I'll block it. And if it's in this thing, I'm going to fight you. I'm dropping out, and I'll see you over on the other side. A 4 is I don't like it. But here's what I'll do. I want to say why I don't like this one particular thing. Because there's going to be, this is one thing of 50 things that we're going to have to deal with. Okay? It's only one thing. It's not to the point where I hate it so bad that I'm going to drop out. I just don't like it. And this is the reason why. And I want to make sure that the decision makers, Congress or whomever, knows why I don't like it. So what it says is I'm not going to hold up the process. I'm going to say I don't like it because, and I'm going to send a paragraph or a page or whatever that says, and this is why I don't like it. So when you're considering this, remember, I didn't like it, although I'm not dropping out. I like the other stuff. Okay? What that does is it allows things to move forward in a way that not everybody's going to, you're going to work hard to try to find a way to get that person from a 4 to a 3. If it isn't going to happen, it isn't going to happen. But it allows the group to continue. Okay? And in fact, it becomes a consensus decision, right? In the end, if you say, I sign in the bottom line, even though there are 4 things in this agreement that I put in a paragraph or 2 that I just did not like, it's a consensus agreement. It's a consensus agreement with some disagreement. Okay? Steph.
Steve, just a quick question. When you were talking about the 5 blockage. Steve, when you were talking about the 5 fingers block it, I won't support it, and then you always said, and I'm leaving or going to the other side. But couldn't that just mean that that item is taken off the table?
It can. It's up to the group. So it's I'm leaving if this stays in. The group can decide, right? It could be, and I've seen this happen on one occasion. This was the top issue for that person at the table. Okay? This was it. This is the only reason the person is at the table. If they can't get it, why be at the table, right? So I mean that's the hard work. And that's the work of the group, and it's it's a deal breaker. It really is, and I've seen it twice in situations. We have another question.
So showing that there's a 3 to 2 or 4 to 1. Showing that there is a consensus and there's different opinions isn't always such a bad thing, right? I would think. And so you can sit there and say, I agree with all this except for this issue, and you give it a chance for it to be incorporated. If it isn't, you go no, and and stand out. But having that, sometimes if you sit there and look at certain boards and it's always 5-0, and you sit there and wonder, was there any real difference of opinions, or was there discussion, and so just your thoughts about when you look at a vote and a track record and showing that there's, it isn't a consensus and there isn't a 5-0 vote all the time. Is that a bad thing?
No, not necessarily. What I'm drawing a distinction of is the 5 says, if this goes forward, this is the issue for me, right? This is why I'm sitting at the table. And you asked me to come to the table. I said early on, this is things that I want. If I can't get it, there's really no reason for me to stay. That's an extreme. What the 1 through 4 tells you is, yeah, I didn't like these. There's 4 things in here aren't for me, but I'm still here because it's not a deal breaker. And it just says, yeah, I am not agreeing. So. No, that to me that's a consensus decision, right? I mean, in the end, you sign on the bottom line that, yeah, this whole package goes through. Some are a couple of stinkers, but the whole package, we're going to go ahead and push it through.
And the decision makers then look at that and say, well, yeah, there was some dissension here. That was the rule we used in the Forest Task Force. And I think conveying to the governor that, yeah, there were some things in here that people said, don't really like, was an important component. So the decision makers then have something to work on and act on. And, at the point where, if it's like there are a lot of people like down on it, so what we will do is, here's a report. Here's how all the votes went. Here's a case in which there was significant disagreement. We had lots of 4s, lots of 3s, maybe a smattering of 1s. There were a bunch of people that were all out 11, and there was a lot of people like, stinker. It goes, right? I mean, that's the discussion of the group, all right? Was this going to be in the package sent forward to the decision makers? And that's basically the way that we look at it.
I'd just like to add an example to what you're talking about, Steve, just to illustrate it. Jessica, you brought up the Forest Task Force earlier, which I think is a great example of this too. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think we came out with like 119 recommendations and sub-recommendations.
That was a little bit
Down to 52. So let's say 52. We came out with 52 recommendations and sub-recommendations. There were 19 people on this task force, extremely diverse. You've got the charter of this Forest Task Force on your table, so you can see what their arrangement was. And I think there were 2 or 3 items where people had given a 4. They didn't agree with it, but not enough to hold up the process. And we added their language in the report to explain why they gave the 4. So that was very valuable information, as you were saying, in this case for the governor, to understand why there's a 4. That's really valuable information. So just to give you an example of what we're talking about.
I'll go with Eric.
Under what circumstances is it really legitimate if somebody has a breaker to say, well, fine, leave the group, and we'll just go on without it, because then you don't have consensus.
Right. And that's the hard work of the group. I mean, you really have to, the group has to look at that and say, okay, what does this really mean for us? Is there room for some compromise here? How can we move you from a 5, at least to a 4? And so, I mean, the idea here, and I've prefaced it, is that what you're attempting to do in all cases is, all right, we got a proposal floated around. We'll have some conversation on that. What do you think? Discussion, well, I kind of like it, but if we could do this, or how about if we do that? And it gets morphed and changed through this conversation. Conversation kind of ends, and then what we'll do is we'll do a straw poll. Okay? How many 1s, how many 2s, how many 3s? Anybody at a 4? Anybody at a 5? Okay, 1 person at a 5. What's the deal breaker for you? What's going on here? Explains what that is. All right, is there a way that we can, we can change this, modify this in any way to bring you back? Right? So that's the work. It's the work of the group to try to do that. If not, I mean, and I've seen this in a case which just wasn't going to happen for whatever reason, and it's rare. And I would say, I mean, I've done 30, 40, I don't know, some number of multi-party negotiations over 25 years. It's happened twice. Okay. So don't think about it as, oh my God, this is a deal breaker, because it's usually not. But that's the work of the group, and that's where the work starts. Other questions? So this is, a tool that we use, something for you to consider. And think about how that might work. Let's talk a little bit about, and this sort of brings up questions about, who's in the driver's seat anyway, right? Who's going to make these decisions? And, I think you as county commissioners have to really think that through. And how you're going to make that, what is it, how you're going to work through these processes in your role as county commissioner. I mean, we talked about it this morning. It's tough, right? I mean, you've got a crew on the outside that's looking at you and saying, okay, we're watching you. So, you know, I think that you guys and gals need to really think about this and how this is going to work. I can just tell you that consensus-based process, where you're seeking consensus, it may not always arrive, where you're seeking consensus alleviates a lot of the other issues that you run into. That's particularly related to strategizing and counting votes and all that. People who know Robert's Rules of Order really well can manipulate the system and make it work for them. If you don't know Robert's Rules of Order in that system, you're at a disadvantage. And this kind of takes that away. In that way. Okay. So the last thing that I want you to do, so we've just introduced those things. The charter, the idea of a charter, this idea of consensus. What we're going to do from here on out, from this afternoon, is we want you to talk about some of the things that are going to be difficult for you to do. Okay? It's a good time to have this conversation. Because you're here, nothing's really counting yet, but you're going to have to deal with some issues. So there's a sheet we call sticky issues. Take a look at that. Here's what we did. Chris and I went through the guidelines. Oh, that one might be a little tough. Oh, that's going to be tough to work on. Oh, look at that one. So we identify 8 of them. Yeah. Are there some extras? I know there's a bunch floating around here. Do we have sticky issues? Got some sticky. Does anybody need any? Okay, we've kind of already dealt with one. And then who serves on the committee? We've had a conversation about that. Number 2, we just finished that conversation. How will decisions be made? However you want to work on that one. Number 3 is, so this comes out of guideline section 2FVII. So how does a committee determine what unique, supplemental, or other features should be considered? Okay? In definition of a WSA and what it consists of. Number 4, how will the committee identify anticipated future uses of a particular WSA? The guidelines tell you to take a look at that. How do you know what those are going to be? You may think that the anticipated future use is going to be X. And somebody else says, oh, no. It's going to be Y. Right? You're going to have to wrestle through those. Number 5, how will the committee decide what other geographic areas of interest within the county shall be considered for potential inclusion in its recommendation? Another sticky issue. Now this one, we'll see where it goes. If wilderness is recommended for a particular area within the WSA, what criteria will the committee use to decide whether to designate it in strict conformity to the Wilderness Act as it does in the guidelines, or provide for additional uses? I've heard some people say, well, you just can't even do that. It's illegal. I don't know. I have no idea. But that's going to be something you're going to have a conversation about, as it's stated in the guidelines. Number 7, if release is recommended for a particular area within the WSA, what criteria will the committee use to decide whether to designate it as soft release or hard release? Again, I don't know if that's even possible. I'm not an attorney. I don't really know the law here. Some people say, well, that's not even allowed. So I don't know what that, but those are some things in the guidelines anyway to sort of consider and think about. What we want you to do, and Jess is going to guide us through this one, is number 8. We want you to sit at your tables and have some conversation around this one. What criteria will the committee use? Or we don't even have to get to that very specific, but just kick around this idea of whether to include directed management actions on a particular area within the WSA. Everybody know what I mean by that? It's the last paragraph in the guidelines.
Page 9.
Page 9 of the guidelines, if you guys have them. If somebody has them at your table, share them with others. That's the guideline that says, you know, there's something more to this, and this is where Pete was talking about, you know, this is where we can start to think about all the things, you know, that make these solutions possible. All right, we can start to think outside the box. So, you know, let's think about those things that are possible here.
So how do you get there? And what does that look like? What might that look like in your neck of the woods? So with that, I'll just guide you.
Thanks, Steve. So this is one of the pieces of the guidelines where I think you all have a real chance to create that value. So what do you think are criteria that a committee can use to decide whether to include directed management actions on a particular area within a WSA? So I'd like you, in your groups, to go through this question and think about criteria that might be good candidates to include when a committee is using it to decide to include direct management actions. Greg, did you say that folks are kind of split up based on area? Yes. Okay, so Greg has very kindly gone through all the hard work with Kelly to split you up into groups. You are approximately in the same geographic areas. So think about your areas, or pick, an area that you all have in common, and if you were to apply criteria to that, what would you use? I'll come through and see if there's any questions.
Yeah. That area just well. Yeah, everybody left it. Something we saw. It could be.
One note, if each table could find a volunteer note taker to be able to report back to everyone.
Yeah. You're free. My dad and
I can take the other and that's what they want. And there's a lot of. But in that area. And it doesn't bother us. But I have never heard. And my question
It's not 100%. Non-issue. There's no big lines. There are no lots. Oh, yeah, I can see that. Separate tracks.
Yeah. And here's the landing. I got reading part.
Never come across. That would be fine in the original. Is that what this, I don't even understand what. I do not have I wrote access and existing. Space, direct management, does that mean you're kind of reneging on that whole, like Matt's talking about, you have areas of designated capital W wellness, we don't take vehicles in there for, almost, I think, it's allowed. Basically, you don't cost anything. And so is that what this is getting at? Is that you would designate areas that, I don't know how I understand this question. The way I think about this is there's multiple possibilities. You can stay back in the same thing. Just redesignated as something. Or you can open it up. I see what you're saying, is just calling it a conservation reserve or something, whatever, a special
Or you can go
reserve.
back and.
But
I think until we have to answer this, what box do we have? Yeah. Find some of these broader things. It's a place to start.
So, I'm reading that.
so honestly, that area is pretty good. Public access almost. Access to.
That area is different than.
Like, there is no. That's what they were saying.
I don't think so. I know that's a major motivation. And start with love.
There are doing.
That's a bad idea.
Well, at least, I'll
Now, with these boundaries, yes, I know there are big discussions around these boundaries.
And what the vast majority are
That's my point. That's my point. That's right.
Maps show a trail that really isn't there, and it's washed out.
I think the challenge is managing
Impact on,
lands.
you know, what might consider the.
Yeah, you just keep
Have you given them a
going.
5 year one?
All right, everyone, 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes, please.
And is it a landscape?
The same is true of the other areas too, it's not like.
Things change.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't need stickies, do we?
You've got markers. We've got piles. I'm sure piles. Okay, everyone. Let's find out what you came up with. I've heard amazing discussion. So we're really looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So, which group would like to go first? What did you come up with?
We haven't miscorrected this.
Okay.
Random.
All right. So Steve is going to take notes. And what we're really interested Matthew. Commissioner Avery.
He needed to go sit in the back of the class.
Way too much fun. Okay, everyone. So, go for it. What did your group come up with?
Well, I mean, some of the obvious ones were just obviously all users that are at the table right from the get-go. That we are, we start with some ideas, what's going to be all the users at the table, just bringing out facts and begin trying to align some of the values associated with wildlife, with user groups, priorities, try to sort through it, that would set the stage in for field trips. But then we use the analogy a little bit about chips and what are the various chips we could bring to the table in terms of exchanges of other lands, of compromises in terms of size of the capital. Yeah, okay. Of the capital wilderness areas and designation. But to begin thinking about it in terms of parlay.
Okay. Yeah, trade-offs.
Yep. Anything else on this?
Okay, wonderful. Okay, that's great. Next group, please. Yes.
So we approach this through kind of a series of questions or kind of considerations that we thought ought to be part of the discussion. So those are what were the original criteria for why these areas were designated as WSAs, and what are some of the historical uses? Does it still meet those criteria today? What are the values local stakeholders place on these areas? So that kind of speaks to getting everybody to the table from the outset. What are the existing human uses there? Talked about ground truthing and field trips being critical, also using satellite imagery and different data and map layers. Considerations around appropriate uses based on topography and soils and vegetation and wildlife and those types of things. What's the level of existing development in some of these areas? And then finally, if it doesn't meet criteria, the criteria for Big W wilderness, but it's still, fairly pristine and there's values placed on that area by local stakeholders, then explore a more tailored approach like special management areas or some other ACECs or prescriptive type of designation that's maybe not wilderness, but protects some of the values that the stakeholders have put on.
Okay. Great. Very thorough thinking. Another group, please. Any any others.
So, well, just a play on that.
Yes.
So when it gets to that point of, we're gonna do something other than WSA, some of the things that kind of came up with was, it won't break other laws outside of the state, local, federal laws, in the area.
Okay.
And it will allow continued, use, existing uses.
Okay.
And then achieve desired characteristics. So whatever the prescription would be, it would achieve the desired characteristics that the group had seen in the area. And they also would want to have a desire to have it permanent.
Okay. Nice criteria. Yeah.
We started from the premise that the area in question would not be wilderness. I think some of you did, some of you did. But some of this will be a bit repetitive. But just asking about the condition in present day. What are the existing uses? What are the potential future uses? Does a particular area offer in terms of its unique features? The information gathering, it would be important to our group to have that information come from a neutral third party when you're collecting data, whether it's maps or soil layers, what have you. We also talked about looking at the surrounding land around the discrete WSA, looking at those, the values of that landscape. Is there a migration corridor? Is there a great trout fishery? What are the existing uses of the surrounding land? And then maybe after you answer some of those questions, you might talk about some discrete land swaps, consolidation of uses. And we also acknowledge that there's going to be several instances where cross-county cooperation will be important. And then lastly, we would also consider, would our bill create costs for the agencies, and would we have to find offsets for those costs?
Okay.
Or new resources.
Okay, that subject has come up before too. Thanks, Lisa. Would your group like to go now? Oh, sorry, never mind. Sorry. That's my fault.
We were talking about directed management and the philosophy of that.
Okay.
Congress has some leeway, but I don't think we want to press our luck on that issue. Because realistically, the more things you put in there that's asking them to be red flags, they already know those. I think you jeopardize your county proposal as well as the state proposal. So asking Congress to direct certain things needs to be done reasonably and judiciously and very sparingly. As far as process, we focus on the Sweetwater Rocks down here, which is between us and Natrona County.
Right.
So I think the vision is that Natrona will form their committee, we'll form our committee, we'll carefully do our charter and follow all those guidelines. That between now and summer, we'll look at those areas and ground truth and see how they got there, what's going on there, and you can do that even though it's under snow. So we can do a lot of that. And then when we decide to go out there, Natrona County and Fremont County would jointly go out there and invite the ranchers, the rock climbers, other interest groups that may not be directly represented on our committee, but have interest in that area and have an event or, time to do that. Hear everybody and listen to what they like and what they don't like, even though they're not on that committee. And then we'll kind of adjourn to our separate corners and kind of hash that out, but I think the goal would be then, the John and Tremont would say, we have this joint proposal.
Okay, okay. Great plan. All right.
We don't really have a lot to add that hasn't been covered. I mean, one thing we talked about was, the potential for a certain area to be designated wilderness, but that, some of the local people are interested in doing some habitat improvements for both the grazing and the wildlife. How could you do some direct management to put like the cultural area to things like that, and then, it's kind of a win for everybody, maybe something like that on the table.
Okay, great. Thank you. Who would like to go next? Oh, yeah. I don't think we have a whole lot to add either. I think we've covered a lot of ground that's already been mentioned, but I think we were looking, just like Ethan Thompson said, about that kind of ground truthing stage. So analysis of the existing users and uses, analysis of the potential future uses, the resource analysis that's out there, and then starting to talk about what kind of management you want to see after you've evaluated all of those options. And talking about the management you want to see to meet all the interests before you talk about what do you want to name it. The name is less important at this stage, I think, than how do you want it to manage the future. Okay, great. Thank you.
Parker covered a lot of topics in a short amount of time. One of the things that we would like to look into more is at what point would it be advantageous to start including other things such as BLM and Forest Service into the process to make sure we're not creating ourselves more work in the long run.
That's a good idea.
We talked about looking at those lands specifically for what the most appropriate use is, and one such instance was, would it be a better designation as a special recreation area instead of a wilderness area? And would that still achieve the same goals in the long run? We touched on validity of currently held lease agreements as well as recognition of valid existing rights. And with that, potential designation between surface versus subsurface disturbance. We touched on the probability and the possibility of land or lease exchanges, and consideration of what available resources are in the area. If it's an area that does not contain water per se, is it worthwhile to still designate that? And if not, is it worthwhile instead to focus on enlarging a different area? We also briefly touched on the ability to do future development on those lands, as well as the ability to do temporary disturbance, to do repairs, maintenance, and maintain good stewardship practices in the area.
Okay, thanks very much, Holly. Also, great ideas.
The area we covered was northeast Wyoming, specifically we're talking about Fortification Creek, and a couple of things that we mentioned is the area surrounding it, as far as private land ownership and how their rights would be protected. And since that area has seen a lot of oil and gas development infrastructure, how that would be maintained in the future if it comes back around, definitely. Currently there exists a population side, Fortification Creek, and how that would be maintained if a certain benefit tool is selected.
I'm sorry, I missed that part though.
Could you speak up a little bit?
Oh, sorry.
More, please?
The elk population that exists in Fortification Creek, how that would be maintained if it was designated or selected a certain management tool. We pretty much covered everything else. Everyone else covered grazing allotments, private land ownership. That's great.
Okay, thanks very much. I have the antlers of one of those bull elk from Fortification Creek in my house. It's pretty impressive.
So our group, we basically went with a statewide approach and did some philosophizing around that. The national conservation areas are actually would be for BLM.
WSA considerations. We have our list of considerations, not necessarily specifically criteria, but these would also be considerations for a directed management designation. That would be historical boundaries. Everything's roadless back when WSA was considered. So that would be one item to consider. Scientific evidence, both baseline data as well as current on-the-ground assessments. Current use, that's related to extractive use, mineral and energy development, as well as recreationalists, users that actually benefit from these lands. Access, impact, recreation, for example. Private property, just existing rights, which would be very key. The natural resources, energy and mineral resources. There would be the need for an inventory of those resources. Adjacent land uses. And also not mentioned yet, economic impact, which I think would be extremely important. Economic assessment of impacts. Density of trails, and yeah, that's
Thanks very much. Any other groups? Have we missed anyone? I don't think so. Okay. So, the good news is there is a lot of commonality. Some of you came up with some unique ideas like economic aspects, but there are a lot of things that you all came up with that you considered important. So, I don't know if WCCA can compile these notes, but it might provide a nice checklist for county commissioners and fellow stakeholders on these issues of ways of going about this, things to touch on. What I really would like right now is, were there any questions that came up in your minds or any problems that started emerging that you were wondering about, that not just for Steve and I, that we can ask, but perhaps Pete and Greg can help you with too? Are there any lingering questions, any lingering thoughts about this after a whole day of talking about this? What's on your minds? Joel?
It was mentioned early on that somebody formerly in BLM's Knowledge Field Office had done a significant amount of work, either during establishment or during when they made the recommendation to Congress to release or not release. That information, I think, would really be helpful to all of us, and that's what I would like to do, is at least look at what the thinking was when these first came about and why. And I think that would be helpful to all of us.
Joel, thanks for that. That was me, and I was mentioning a fellow by the name of Vernon Lovejoy, who was in the Rollins Fieldhouse at the time. You all will remember that when the WSAs were created, the agencies were required to give their recommendations to Congress about what should be wilderness and what should be released. Those came out in 1991, so they're a little bit stale. What Vernon put together is more updated maps, overlaid with big game migration corridors, oil and gas, mining, sage-grouse core areas, all sorts of other areas. He basically did that for pretty much every WSA in the state. Got that here in this one book. We have to figure out a way, and we will, Gregor and I will figure out a way to make sure that it's available for everyone to look at. In terms of a starting point, to just look at, it's a great starting point. Again, he has his own personal recommendations in there. I'm not endorsing those. But in terms of the maps, they're very helpful. Feel free to come look at this. The BLM recommendations are on our website already, on the WPLI website. We're going to put all sorts of documents up on there. All of your emails are captured, and we're going to create an opt-in list on our website to push notifications out about when counties have decided to join, who their teams look like, meeting times, all that stuff. It'll be a clearinghouse. And we'll get this on there too, in one way or another. Just haven't figured out quite the mechanics of doing that, Joel. We'll make it available for everybody because it is quite helpful.
Okay. Thanks, Pete.
Pete, maybe you could jump in with this one too. You started this morning, if I understood it correctly, your preference would be to kind of bundle all of these recommendations into one state recommendation. Can you speak to the pros and cons? You've obviously given this some thought. As counties would maybe move faster and they're ready to go and a county's ready to move something forward, that other counties might be able to build momentum off of. Could that be another strategic approach that we take? Or again, if you could just kind of share with us why we would prefer to just kind of bundle all of the recommendations into one statewide bundle.
Sure, Paul, thanks. And you know, I respect Paul Spittler's opinion about multiple bites of the apple, though I think in Nevada's case, particularly, you cannot diminish the role of the majority leader of the Senate. When you have that role, and I liken it to Paul Spittler of the difference between first class and coach. It's not a little bit different. It's a lot different. And that's the difference between a majority leader of the Senate and a regular senator. Now Senator Barrasso has a gavel. He'll continue to have a gavel. He's in leadership. You know, we have a great delegation, a strong delegation of a new House member, but other than that, a strong delegation. But cannot minimize the ability of a majority leader to do what he wants. So I am not opposed to trying several, but I don't want to impose any of that. I would like to try to have the biggest solution we can have, and if there's follow-ons later, we can do that. There's nothing stopping us. But I don't have the confidence that we'll have the multiple bites that Paul Spittler has confidence in. Paul's been doing this for a long time, so I say that with all respect, but it's just where I'm coming from on that.
Any other? Travis, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, it's okay.
So yeah, I was just going to add on to Pete's observation there, and in observations of many other pieces of legislation. The actual work required and time required, you know, by a one county bill versus a 3 county bill isn't 3 times harder, you know, or 3 times more difficult, or takes 3 times as long, you know. You're talking about advancing a bill. And so there's some efficiencies, you know, with and you just wouldn't want to, you know, if there's, I just make this up, if 7 counties opt in, and you don't want to do 7 bills one after the other, because you know you're looking at 20 years to get that passed. And so I think having some groups, you know, makes a lot of sense. Now, to me, the question, you know, is it 1, you know, is it 2, you know, but having individual county bills, it takes a lot of work to get it passed. And so there's not a lot of difference between passing a bill that has 3 or 4 counties versus passing a bill that's, you know, a standalone. It's just not, you know, it just doesn't add that much more to the time in the process and the bandwidth and those sorts of things.
I want to go back to this wilderness issue, and because I'm gray haired, I get to talk about the past.
Only for so long.
Be careful. If you remember, when these areas were designated as wilderness study areas, there was a group of people out there that wanted them wilderness, and there was a group of people that hated them being in WSAs. There's a lot of that feeling out there. And the minefield I think that we are going to be stepping into is there are going to be people out there, if there is a recommendation to move a wilderness study area into something other than wilderness, there's bean counters out there that say, we just lost, you know, 20,000 acres or 200,000 acres of potential wilderness. And they're going to be mad. There are going to be people out there that want it all hard release, multiple use, free for all out there. I think the minefield we're going to be moving across, we're going to have to go between those. And I'm a little concerned on it'd be nice to get some congressional feeling on if it, say it is wilderness, or if it's wilderness with a soft release. I think I heard Paul say there are groups out there that are gonna fight that, because I think forest health was the issue we were talking about. I'd like to have some kind of, understanding of, if we're gonna ask for directed management, like, yeah, it'll be wilderness, but we're gonna manage forest health issues in there. Are those doable? And I hope everything comes on the table, but I think sometimes reality is gonna have to set in on what we can get, what is defensible, what our senators and representatives can do. So it'd be nice to have that maybe in our best pocket, to have that as a guideline, not a etched in stone rule. But you see where I'm going, Pete?
Yeah.
Is how much directed action can we ask for without, really messing the process up?
Sure. Appreciate that, Doug. Travis might have some thoughts about this too, but let me just talk, there's two things I want to say to respond to that. One, let me just clarify for a minute what we mean when we're talking about directed action, directed management action. I have not been contemplating directed action to mean necessarily a declaration of wilderness with caveats. What I'm talking about is some of the other interesting things that Mark talked about, where an area was designated as a recreation area. It's not wilderness. It's not a full release. It's a different directed management already within the administrative structure that the BLM and the Forest Service are aware of and use. Might be, there's some that are already there, areas of critical and environmental concern, national conservation areas, national recreation areas, even, dare I say, national monument that we decide we want, not that the president gets to declare here without our consent, like he can do everywhere else. Doesn't mean we can't have one. We just get to decide. That's what I'm talking about directed management, are other things outside of the wilderness structure that the agencies already have a base. Maybe we come up with something entirely new, then we get into dangerous territory there a little bit, but it's not out of the question either. I think you saw it a little bit, both Paul Spittler and Mark were careful and kind to each other. They have a lot of work to do. The rollout of the Utah rollout was not what either one of them wanted. And they're gonna have to work that out, and one of those is caveats to the wilderness, the strict Wilderness Act definition. So, each county, and I'm assuming each county team will have that discussion in your charter and as you move on from that. That's number one. Number two, for commissioners in particular, but also other people, I'm just going to pull back the curtain in our association for a minute. About a month ago, the WCCA board of directors met in Casper for a retreat and strategic planning like every good association should do. Part of that was the board set out 12 expectations of me as the executive director. Other than take over the world, there's 3 of them I want to tell you about. 1, present viable options to problems facing county. 2, present viable solutions for them to consider. And 3, build solid relationships with stakeholders. So I've spent, and Gregory has spent a lot of time talking to the counties and commissioners about why we think we should do this. But for the commissioners, both watching, on the webcast and that are here who are still thinking about doing this, that's what we're doing, presenting you an option. But at the end of the day, the vision has to be yours for your county. We presented you an option, a potential solution, a way to build solid relationships. You've got to own it. And you've got to own it in a way that can kind of tackle the very questions that Doug was talking about and you all are talking about. And that's what we're trying to do here. So it's not going back to WCCA's role. We've launched it. because the board of directors have told me to do things like this, to think big, to not play small ball. But at the end of the day, people more than me, more than our association, have to own it. And I think we can. But that was what, we were talking about that. There's no way for me to give you a direct, here's what can and can't work. I trust that you guys can do that. Travis, Dennis, please go ahead.
I'll just follow up and hand it back to Dennis here real quick. I think that an observation I would have kind of along your lines there, Doug, is Congress is fascinated with, precedent. So people may not have a problem with, what Wyoming includes, but they may have a problem with, oh, well, that sets a new precedent for wilderness, or something along those lines. And so the fewer new precedents, the better, or the easier, for passage. And so if you are going to have, caveats, maybe the thing is not to call it wilderness, have it be something else, have it be a recreational area, have it be a conservation area, have it be, something else that's not setting a new precedent as it relates to the Wilderness Act. And the outcome may be very, very similar, but you're not creating any what outside groups would latch onto and fight as a precedent, even if there's not anything, on the management side that they have. And so, that's just kind of something I would add to that, thought process to consider.
Dennis Ellis with Anadarko, and this is totally different, Pete, so are you good on that topic?
Sorry, go ahead.
This is totally different. I think this whole group has agreed that we need more data and maps and whatnot. I don't know if the 3-ring binder, 80 pages to try and get around is very efficient. I've not used this tool, but I think the governor's within days of releasing his NREX with the University of Wyoming, the Natural Resource Exchange, that sort of emanates from the energy strategy redux that he did this past year. So I think it's very close to coming out. I think it's GIS, internet-based. You can look at any parcel and see the layers of regulation and management and all sorts of different things. I haven't seen the tool, but I would assume the governor needs to put his name on it. It's pretty good. So that might be something that would make us need to try and make 100 copies of the 3-ring binder.
We love paper in Wyoming. Yeah, thanks, Dennis. It's a great point. There's lots of tools out there. This is one that will be helpful and make available, but you're exactly right on that. A lot of counties that have been operating with the agencies and cooperating agencies have put together with GIS specialists pretty detailed maps of their own counties. There's a lot of very granular data that's already available. We're not starting from scratch here. I'm hard pressed to think of a county that doesn't already have truth-based granular GIS data that's already available for use. This is another one. Thanks for reminding me of that.
Lisa. Lisa McGee, Wyoming Outdoor Council. I have a question. I think it's a little bit of a follow-up on Paul Lohan's question about a pilot or a trial versus a whole package. And I guess I wonder, in a month from now, when you have a better sense of how many counties opt in, is there a middle road where you say, okay, we're dealing with about 7 or 8. And among those 8, there's some kind of decision, at least about structuring, timing, so that those of us whose stakeholders, I think everybody in this room, who care about all the places in Wyoming, not just our own counties, how do we meaningfully participate in 8 simultaneous processes, if that's the vision? So I guess my question is there a way to step back in a month or two and say, whether we're going to stagger or we're going to mostly support one and see what the pitfalls were so that others learn? We don't all have to struggle through the obstacles. Do you understand the question?
Thank you. We've discussed this before too. We all have to be aware of all of our capacity problems, capacity limitations. There's not a group sitting in here that has the capacity to do this project fast and full time. It's not going to happen. You might say the commissioners are the best place because there's so many of them and they're in every county. True, but the commissioner job is a part-time job, according to state law. It's a part-time job. I can tell you the vast majority of commissioners are not running because of their interest in public lands. They run because the road that leads to their house sucks. And they think the guy who's there now is sucking at doing a job. So they run. And then they realize, oh, I can be a cooperator. You know, I'm not saying that in a pejorative sense. I'm just saying that most commissioners don't run because of federal lands. So it's a learning process for them too, as it is for me and Gregory and everybody else who operates in this vortex of public lands. And get sucked in, never let go. You know? So it's a capacity problem for the commissioners too. So we all have to be aware of the capacity issue we're going to face. And so we're not going to say, you got to have a proposal by August. You got to have it by 2017. We're going to have time to check in and see how counties are going. But I don't want to impose. I've already said I don't want to play a small ball. I don't want to limit. I want to allow counties the option to move ahead if they want to move ahead. And we'll have time to check in, and we'll continue to do that throughout the process until we develop a package that we think is right and ready. If there's a county that's lagging behind, we'll work on that. We'll have to do it together. I can't give you an answer to that. But I don't want to tell a county, you're moving too slow. Oh, you're moving too fast. You know, I guess to turn the phrase a little bit, we'll have to just jump off that bridge when we get to it.
One more question.
I'm behind you, Jess.
Thank you, Jessica. Terry Wolf, Washington County. See if I can word this question the right way. And I had the conversation earlier with Julie over there, and maybe she might be able to chime in too. But say we go out there and we look at a variety of areas, and we're all in agreement that maybe this particular area might be wilderness, but this other area isn't. And so that comes into the state package, and then it goes up to Washington. The concern I would have is, even though we all agreed upon the decision at the local level, does that, I'm concerned that that's going to get overridden by some of their leadership from various groups there up above, and here we go and look at it on the ground and make a good determination. And is there a way that we can help educate some of those folks that are out in Washington, D.C. that didn't see what we saw on the ground? Does that make sense?
Terry, it's like I paid you to ask that question. It's a perfect question to end on. Because it gets to the point of why we're even doing this, why we're all here together and trying this. If any of you have a vision for your county, we need each other to make it work. We could write a bill as WCCA that we really love, and then Paul's group and American Rivers and everybody else will go out to DC and say this is horrid, and we'll pass the Senate. The Wilderness Society could write a bill that they love, and we could go to our delegation and say, and it won't pass. It's no guarantee of success, but the only possibility we have is advancing a bill that both of us can go to our people in DC and say, this is what we agreed upon. I need you to stand down. And Travis actually has talked about a really interesting case on that, on the grazing side in the Idaho bill that just passed, where in the Idaho wilderness bill that just passed, there's grazing buyouts in there. The NCBA and Public Lands Council are opposed generally to grazing buyouts. But in that case, in Idaho, because it was a locally agreed upon decision, the grazers went to the Public Lands Council and NCBA and said, we know you don't like it, but this is what we agreed upon, and so will you stand down? And they did. And that's what we're going to have to rely on each one of us to do if we end up with an agreement at the end of the day. Is it guaranteed success? No. Is it possible people will parachute in and try to ruin it? Possible. But we have to present the best strategy that we can all defend our own people.
All right, thanks, Pete. So I just wanted to quickly round up Steve and my role here today. It was a pleasure working with you and meeting you. And just to say that we are available for any support that you need from a collaboration standpoint. That's our job, enhance collaborative capacity in Wyoming. So we are here for you. If you need anything, you know where we are. And good luck with everything.
Well, everyone, thank you so much. We're going to wrap up early, but here's the first test of how we can work together. So Lander has built this fabulous facility, but they spent all the money on the facility and they have no money left over for people to actually help set up and clean up the facility. So if you wouldn't mind, it would sure save us a lot if you would just kind of help take your stuff, all your plates and stuff back to that back table, throw the tablecloths on the ground, and we've got the tables and the chairs things back there. Sure be great. Thank you all very much.